education, um, and then how you found out about the war, how you got into the Army, those kinds of things. If you'll start with that, then we'll be good.
Okay.
Start by telling me your name and your battalion.
My name is Nick Glumac. I was in Headquarters Company Combat Command B of the 12th Armored Division. I was a radio operator in that company. I was head of what they call the net. The Headquarters Company had all the commanding officers that issued orders to the different tank battalions, infantry, reconnaissance, scouting, ordnance, and I relayed all the messages to the operators in those battalions. Okay, I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, 1920. Went to school there through high school. After high school, I went to work as a grocery clerk in a large grocery store. Then I quit that and went to work in a local steel mill because it paid better. And while working at the steel mill, I learned I was about to be drafted. So I had one brother. He and I were both drafted together. Both ended up in the 12th Armored Division. And shortly before we went overseas, he was here in Barkley, he broke a thumb. And they wouldn't let him go overseas with us until his thumb was healed up, which it didn't heal up, and he ended up in the Pacific, where the 12th went to Europe. And served my tour of duty over there, was overseas a year and a half. And then came back home in February 1946.
How did you first hear about the war? Where were you on Pearl Harbor Day?
Well, I was just out of high school, and of course I'd followed all the news about Hitler and Germany, about him taking over all the other countries. First, while I was still in high school, he marched into the Sudetenland, which he was forbidden to do. Nobody did anything about it. Then he took over Austria, then a part of Czechoslovakia, and finally when he invaded Poland in 1939, I was just out of high school then because I graduated in 1939. Then France and England declared war on Germany, and that started World War II. And of course we didn't get in it till later, but I was following all the news pretty closely because I knew I'd be going in the service too, if we got in.
How did you feel when you found out about the bombings on Pearl Harbor?
When I went?
How did you feel when you found out about Pearl Harbor?
About Pearl Harbor? Well, then I knew I'd be going in the service real shortly. It wouldn't be too long. As it turned out, my dad was hurt, and I had to support the family for about almost a year until he went back to work. Then I became 1A and I went in.
Where did you have your basic training?
We took our basic, the whole 12th, in Camp Campbell, Kentucky, which is now Fort Campbell. It's a permanent base. We were there when it first opened up in 1942. Then from there we went on maneuvers in Tennessee. They reorganized the division, and they shipped us to Camp Barkley here just out of Abilene.
When you were on maneuvers, what kinds of things did you do during maneuvers?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
What kinds of things did you do when you were on maneuvers in Tennessee and during training?
Well, what I did mostly was operate radios. They had, communication between units, even on maneuvers. It was steady all the time. You're always sending and receiving radio messages. And I operated 2 radios, one using voice and one using Morse code. The Army or the military has quit using Morse code now completely, so it's an obsolete thing. But at that time, it's one of the best ways to communicate.
How did you learn Morse code?
Went to radio school in Camp Campbell, Kentucky. It took me 2 weeks. I was the first one to do it, to pass 20 words a minute. And then we went to advanced radio school in Fort Knox, Kentucky. Both were 3-month courses. And that's the training we had for that.
Did you train with anything other than the radios?
Oh, sure. Everybody had to. For instance, we fired every gun they had. I made expert on several of them. Threw hand grenades practice. I could take a machine gun, 30 caliber machine gun apart and put it back together again blindfolded in a minute and a half.
Wow.
I used to teach a course in that during basic. But they never made a machine gunner out of me.
How did you get into the radio operator? Did you choose that, or
No.
did they just assign you?
Oh, when we were inducted into the Army in Fort Snelling, Minnesota, they gave us everybody a code test. Just a bunch of dit-das.
Mm-hmm.
And you were supposed to tell if they were similar or different. And I believe the ones that passed high on that test became radio operators.
Tell me more about your training when you were in Camp Campbell and then at Camp Barkley.
Well, Camp Campbell, we took all sorts of training. I happened to mention it to one of my friends today, had a test. They took us out in the field and they exploded some canisters of poison gas. One of them was lewisite, which smells like coal smoke. So when they exploded that one, everybody got a whiff. They asked us what gas that was. We told them Camp Campbell, because the camp was all heated by coal and the smell of coal smoke was everywhere.
Oh, so that's what...
Nobody said lewisite. They knew what it was, but they said Camp Campbell. And we had other sort of map training, compass training, give you a compass and go find a point, all different kinds of things. And then we further trained in Barkley. Oh, I can't remember all the things we did, but they'd send the radio operators out in the woods by ourselves, send messages back and forth to each other. Some messages that were made up by somebody, you know. Oh, we did 25-mile hikes and runs and all that stuff. A lot of physical training, a lot of marching, and cleaning of equipment, materials, vehicles, all that sort of thing. And that was about it.
Did you ever get to go into Abilene?
Oh, several times. There are 3 things I remember about Abilene that happened here. I was waiting in line outside of a theater with a friend of mine, and there was a blonde girl in line ahead of us. And I told my buddy, I said, I've seen one head of blonde hair like that in my life. And that was on a girl that I used to go to school with. Then I didn't think anything further, but then we got inside the theater and we had to wait there, and I see the girl again. This time I recognized her. She looked at me, she recognized me right away. It turned out we had gone to grade school together. She remembered my first name, I remembered her first name. Neither one of us remembered our last names, because in grade school you were called by your first name all the time. Turned out it was a girl. Then I met another friend from home walking down the street in Abilene. And then a buddy of mine and I went to eat a steak dinner in a cafe. Well, we had a big steak. They came out with the steak on a huge platter. And I had set my bread or toast or whatever was on this side of the platter, and I'm cutting the steak here, and all of a sudden the platter went like that. My toast went clear across the room and landed in some guy's lap. And I'm trying to prevent myself from laughing, you know. I was trying to turn my head so he wouldn't see me laughing. I did see him start looking around, wondering where on earth that toast came from. But I didn't come to Abilene too often. I probably half a dozen times, because I stayed pretty busy out on the base.
What was it like on the base at Camp Barkley?
You know, it wasn't too bad. I didn't mind it. I still am an inveterate beer drinker. I love beer. And I belonged to a sergeant's club out on the base here, and they had free beer every Wednesday night, and I would put away a lot of beer. I've told my wife about that.
Tell me about shipping out to go overseas.
My mind does not pick up leaving here. I can't remember that at all. I do remember on the train, they had made me the physical fitness instructor for the company when we were here in Barkley. And I used to lead the company in calisthenics and different physical exercises. I do remember we stopped in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had to get the company out in the city square there, and we had to go through a set of calisthenics. I suppose the powers that be wanted us to be in shape, you know. So, and then I remember when we hit Camp Shanks, New York. It was kind of a foggy evening. We had to walk 1.5 miles to get to the boat, and I had to carry all the company flashlights, 168 pounds of flashlights, including my duffel bag, which was packed full. They're about that big, you know, that wide, and a musette bag full, and your carbine I had. When I got on that boat, I was all in. Whew. We walked 1.5 miles carrying that, if you can imagine. Of course, I was pretty strong in those days.
That's a lot to carry.
Yeah. Then when we left, I got seasick just on the swells outside of New York, just that up and down. I was like, you know. But I never got seasick out in the ocean. And I used to tease all my buddies that did. You know, I'd razz them.
Did you have a job on the ship? Did you have something you had to do?
No, not really. Everybody had to pull KP at least once during. It took us 10 days to get across. And I pulled KP one day. Sergeants, everybody, you know, not the officers, but all the enlisted men, from master sergeants on down. So that was the only real job I had. Otherwise, we read a lot of books and look out over the ocean. Wasn't much to do.
Tell me about landing.
We landed in Southampton, England. You're glad to see land again. Then I don't remember disembarking. I remember going up to this English army base that we were on. I remember being there a month. I remember how cold it was in the barracks, no heat. It was November of '44, so it was starting to cool down, you know. I remember taking everything out of, we slept on canvas cots, took all my socks, extra shirts, underwear, everything, put them down under the blanket so that I'd have insulation from down below.
What happened when you left after that month in that camp?
Then we boarded LSTs to cross the channel. And the one thing I remember about that trip was I never ate that good while I was in the service. I says, boy, does the Navy have good food. They ate good, and so did we.
How long did it take to cross?
I can't remember. Not very long. But I don't remember the exact time. Then when we landed pulled up in a little town called Offay, France. And a bunch of my buddies and I slept in a huge barn upstairs in a big hayloft. Well, there must have been 24 of us up there. And I remember pulling guard duty at night there. It was on the fringe of this little town. And I can remember there's woods right 50 feet in front of me, and I can remember looking at those shadows and imagining a German to be behind every tree there. You know?
Tell me about combat, about your combat experiences.
Well, my company was kind of a little bit behind the line, as it was then during the winter. It was a regular front line. We were about even with our field artillery. We weren't out of range of German artillery. And because we had 7 radios going in our company all the time, the Germans would zero in on us through the radio transmission. So we received a lot of artillery shells. And my one buddy and I, either the first day up there or the second, a piece of shrapnel from an exploding shell went right between our 2 heads and embedded itself in a door right behind us. We got out of there fast. And then, well, later on in combat, when they sent us into Germany, there was no front lines then. They just sent us down the roads and overcome any resistance out in front and forget about what's on the sides. And usually the Germans a lot of them would give up, you know, because they knew that maybe our division would be 100 miles ahead of them. They'd say, why fight anymore, you know? So anyway, then there's strafing planes. I helped fire at one. I don't know if I helped shoot it down towards the end of the war, but 2 German planes came out of a valley down the Bavarian Alps, and one of them flew directly over our column. Everybody opened up on him. The other 2 got out of there as fast as they could. The one that flew over our column didn't get 500 feet, and down he went and exploded. So other than that, there's not too many things I remember.
What was the worst day for you during combat?
The worst day? I can't remember any one being worse than the other. Every day is, when you think you're going to be dead the next second, that time is bad. But like I was telling somebody today, we'd go through that, the next minute we'd be laughing about it. We had to make fun of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So one day was about as bad as any other. I couldn't pick, if I thought about it for 100 years, I couldn't pick out any worse day. Because it's all the same, you know. When instant death is close to you, right there, one day is as same as the other.
Were you afraid?
Oh, everybody was. If they say they weren't, they're nuts. They're lying. But like I said, you'd be scared to death one minute, next minute you're laughing at yourself and everybody else. That's the way we were.
What was your worst battle? Your worst battle?
Well, the one at Herlisheim. I wasn't directly involved in there, but we got a lot of shelling in that battle. Our company did. And we were surrounded on 3 sides. I know they had a plan for us. They didn't say retreat, because they said the American Army never retreats. We're going to make a retrograde movement. had to couch it in a certain phrase.
Mhm.
But the first couple of days we were up near the front there, right just about at the front line, is when one of our close buddies was killed. He was the only one in our company that was killed. We had about 20, 30 guys wounded, mostly shrapnel. But he was the only one that... And they had us dig a foxhole there when we first got there. I dug a nice deep foxhole. I'm glad I wasn't in it, because the shell that killed my buddy had hit the building and shrapnel had sprayed down on him. Next morning I looked, there's a huge steel angle iron buried right impaled in my
In your
foxhole.
foxhole.
I said, I'm glad I wasn't in it.
Mhm. What other places did you go during combat?
Well, during combat, well, we went all the way through Germany. We started out in the eastern part of France, then through the Saarland. After we went down the Colmar pocket, cleaned the Germans out of there. Then up through the Saarland, we were transferred to Patton's army for a couple of weeks. When this happened, I was on pass in Brussels. I had a 4-day pass. Came back, our division was gone from where we'd left them. So we asked around, they'd get down, and so they went up to join Patton, the Third Army, for the push up to the Rhine River. So I caught up to my company just close to the Rhine, just in time to get bombed by Bed Check Charlie, as we called it, the German plane that come over every night. We didn't care. We were drinking French 75s, cognac and champagne.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't let him bother us too much.
What else? What else do you remember?
Well, I had 2 trips to the Riviera, which were nice. I really enjoyed those trips. One, they're both after the war ended. One I flew from Germany, the other we were stationed in southern France near Marseille, waiting for boats to come home. And we had to wait 2 months, I think, before they finally got us a boat to get home on. Then we got home on the trip back on this ship. We had a real rough storm about 500 miles east of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Knocked the anchor off our boat. Boy, we were wondering whether we'd make it. I know, I was ready to dive into the water. Those big 30-foot waves.
Mm-hmm.
I kept thinking at the time, I wonder how long I'll last in that. But we made it all right.
What was your rank?
I was what they call technician 4th grade. It's the same as a sergeant. But they call it a technician because I was a radio operator.
How many points did you have when the war was over?
How many what?
Points did you have?
57, as I recall. I wasn't married, I was single. I know my good friend here, he was married at the time, so he got home a couple months before I did. And we were all scheduled to go to Japan, to fight that war, to finish down until he dropped the atom bomb. And we were all glad of that, because we knew what war was like already, and we didn't want to go through another one, probably a worse one.
Tell me more about occupation. What did you do during the occupation?
Well, one of the things we didn't do much. We had a lot of free time. One of the things I had to do was post guards around different towns, our guards. wake the cooks up in the morning at 4. I'd put what they call charge of quarters. And that meant you'd have to get their guards and switch the guards between guard posts. And this would be all-night duty. And then wake up the cooks in the morning. I don't remember doing much, work beside that. We had a lot of meetings and kept up with current events, things like that. Parades. One parade in Memorial Day, that was all. I was out of our combat command, which had, 2,000 or 3,000 men in it. I was what they called a color guard, where they lined up all these companies and battalions, and they read off the list of all the men that were killed in action. And I'm standing there saluting the flag during all this time.
Wow.
One lieutenant to my right just fell right on his face. He passed out from standing at attention that long. It cuts off the circulation in your legs. Yeah, right. He had his arms down his side, right on his face.
Do you remember anything else about combat?
Not too much. Not too much more. I think I told her about all that I can remember.
What happened to you when you came home?
What's that?
When you came home?
What about it?
Mm-hmm.
No.
What happened when you came home?
Oh, I know. When we were coming overseas, I got in crap games and poker games. I lost every penny I had. I had to borrow, when we hit the States, I had to borrow $1 and some cents from one of my buddies to send a telegram home to tell him I'm coming. So when I got home, I got on the city bus. And at that time, they had a transfer point. I got on that bus there, and my oldest sister was working a night shift at some rug factory there. She was sitting right there, and she recognized me instantly. Of course, I sat with her, and then when I got off, she had to get off a block further. She was already married and had a family. And she called my folks, who lived 8 blocks up from the streetcar line or bus line. And then I had to walk that. She called them to tell them I was coming, so they saw me come in the yard, It was kind of a nice reunion.
Did you get any more schooling? Did you go back to school, or did you just go back to work?
No. I went to work in that steel mill for 6 months. And the work became pretty hard, so I said, I can't do this the rest of my life. So I went to business school, took up accounting. And then I went to Alaska with a couple of friends of mine, was up there for 1 year. Came back home. 4 years later, I got married. My wife and I went to Alaska. We were on our way up there a week after our marriage. We lived up there 11 years. Our daughter was born up there. And then we came back to Duluth.
When you were in combat, did you see any of the concentration camps?
When I was in where?
In combat, overseas?
Did I feel what?
Did you see any of the concentration camps, the death camps?
No, I didn't get to those at all. I did see one carload of kind of a gondola car full of bodies, but it wasn't in the camp itself. So that was all I saw. It was just loaded with bodies. I mean, practically living skeletons.
How did you feel when you saw that?
I can't describe the feeling. I just can't. You feel a multitude of emotions. Hard to put into words. So I still think about that. Of course, you still think about a lot of things. Try not to think of some.
What else do you think about? What are some of the other things that you think about?
Oh, a whole bunch of things. Usually I try to think of the better things that happen. But you also think of the bad ones, and then, it's all history now. You know it's a bad thing, and it doesn't affect you now as much as it did then. Now, as you get older, you learn that the world is an imperfect place. Very much imperfections, and there's a lot of perfection in it too. See, it all kind of balances out.
What are some of the things that you thought were really bad? What were some of the really bad things?
The what?
The bad parts. What?
I don't know. I try not to think of them too much. I try to think of the good things.
Like what?
A lot of good things. I don't know, just there are so many good things in life. Now, like, I have an ability, I don't know if it's, maybe other people do too. If I'm driving in the car, I've told my wife this a lot of times. Matter of fact, I tell her what song I'm listening to at the time. If I have the window open, there's an extraneous stream of noise. I can hear in my mind's ear any melody I wish to hear. And I actually hear it in my mind. I can actually hear words being sung and everything. And so I do that when we're driving along. If we're not talking much or anything, I listen to music. I've been able to do that since before World War II.
Did you do that during combat?
No, I didn't have time. No, I didn't. Whatever, before the war, I remember I used to, and after, but never during the time I was in service.
You had too many other things going on in your head.
Yeah, I guess. And that's one of the, that's a kind of a little pleasure I have, that I can listen to all my favorite music and actually hear it in my mind. I can set my mind to it. I hear different instruments of that playing in that song. Now, I don't know if other people have that ability. I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe they've never tried it.
Is there any one thing that you would want people to learn from your experiences?
Well, I don't know. I don't think there's any one thing. There's just, if I were to make a list, it'd be 1,000 items long. Not any one thing.
Tell me some of those 1,000 items.
Well, for one thing, like they say, appreciate the fact that men who served in that wartime did it for their loved ones, and even like the Germans say, or the Japanese, they fought for their country. They weren't right. We know they weren't. The Germans, I think, realized after the war that they weren't right. They shouldn't have followed Hitler, because he was an expansionist. And that's one thing that people should know. Another thing, that war isn't the best solution. It's the worst solution, the worst possible. All other avenues should be tried and tried repeatedly before, especially in this day and age with the atomic bombs ever present. War is no solution at all, not a bit. And another thing, I'd hate to have any of my children go through a war. You know, no way. I don't know what I'd do. I'd rather take their place. My son, our son, died 8 years ago from diabetic complications. If he'd ever had to go, I would have said, no, look, leave him be and I'll go in his place. So that's about it.
Surely you have more things on your list.
Well, I can't think of any right now. My mind draws a blank. It's nice, you know, like you sitting here interviewing me. It is nice that guys like us can come back and be interviewed. We have you have the freedom, I have the freedom to do it. And so that was one good thing that has come out of the war. There are a lot of good things that came out of it. Even though a lot of things bad happened during the war, a lot of good things came out of it. But it's still, sometimes I wonder about the human race, whether they aren't, you know, trying to solve problems by the age-old methods instead of trying new ones. And they'll have to try new ones, without a doubt. Because if they ever resort to nuclear war, yeah, there won't be another chance.
That's right. What do you think was the most important thing you did during the war?
That I did? Well, I think making sure that the messages that I was given to send were sent and were received, and that I received and relayed for action messages from our frontline combat units. Well, here's an example. I operated for reconnaissance battalion one day. They were, I don't know whether their operator had been killed or what, but guys from our company were taking turns operating with them. Well, they came into a little town, and I rode in a half-track. We had a canvas top on it. And a lieutenant came running to me, send this message real fast, it's urgent. And they used to mark an urgent message with an O or a 0. And I lifted the flap on the half-track. I hear gunfire. Here's one of the infantrymen crouched behind a corner of a building across the street. He's shooting up at a German sniper in a church steeple right above our half-track. The sniper must not have seen us right down below, because he could have dropped a hand grenade on us and killed us all. Well, there were situations like that, but I made sure I had to make sure the message got out, no matter what happened, which I did, send it right out. But I was crouched down in there trying to make as small a target as I could. Well, things like that. And once I couldn't, our radios only went in straight line. If we were down the valley, you couldn't transmit outside the valley. So one morning we couldn't reach our tank battalion. So our communication officer said, well, let's ride up on top of these hills here and we'll see if we can raise them. We got out of the little town we were in, up on the hill, and there's big trees on either side of the road. And this anti-aircraft battalion or company commander came around the corner, and our communication officer asked him if the road was clear ahead. He said, yeah, all of a sudden we heard this bang. Went around the corner, there were Germans in the woods there that knocked 2 big trees over the road. So an aircraft company commander had a half-track with him. They had 4 50 caliber machine guns on it. We had 1 50 caliber on our half-track. They lined up the 2 half-tracks and sprayed the woods. They knew the Germans were still in there, so they pulled the trees off the road, and we continued on up the hill. And it was wide open country, like farm country, and there was a little village right out there, a quarter of a mile in front of us. Germans running around in there. So they lined up the 2 half-tracks and just sprayed the town with 50 caliber bullets. Germans came running out with the flag. There were 15 of them. 2 half-tracks, we captured the whole town. They gave up readily, though. But that was kind of a strange experience.
Did anything else like that ever happen?
It probably did, but I can't recall. One time during our worst battle, the Germans were shooting at some of our P-47 dive bombers that were dive bombing the German tanks. And about 7 or 8 of us were standing out in this courtyard of this building. I'm looking at, you could just about see where their guns are firing. We're too far in front of us. And then you tell where the shells that explode up near. I was telling my buddies, you know, if one of those shells don't explode, it's going to land right about on us. I just got the words out of my mouth when a dud landed 15 feet in front of us,
Wow.
still smoking. And we dove out of there. I was prophetic when I said that.
Tell me what else you remember.
Hmm?
Anything else that you
I
wanna
can't
tell me?
remember anything more I want to say. Can't think of anything. Let's see. No? Can't think of any more. Probably is a lot more, but doesn't come to memory. So
Where did you meet your wife?
I had known my wife 4 years before we were married, and I always respected her, but I never dreamed that I'd end up marrying her. And I don't know, I was tending bar for a friend's wedding party, and I was busy right up to midnight, I guess the reception ended. So I asked a friend of mine to ask my future wife if she'd go out with me that night after midnight. We were going to go fishing. So she said, okay. So I took her home, she changed, and I can't remember if I even changed. We went, a whole gang of us went, about 7 or 8 of us. We went fishing till 5 in the morning. 5 in the morning, I bring her home. She goes right to bed. I end up talking to her mother till 11 the next morning. Well, from that time on, we started going steady. Then we got married, and I had been in Alaska before, so I told her I was planning on going up there. So we got married, and a week later, we were on our way up there. So then next year will be our 50th wedding anniversary.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Not too much more. Not that I can think of.
Anything at all? This is your time.
No, I can't think of anything. If I try to think of something, I won't be able to think of it. It's like names. If I forget about it, I'll think about it after, you know. You do get more forgetful as you get older, you know. Everybody does, I think, especially me.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're quite welcome.